Well, hello everybody, and welcome back to another weather video. And as we promised yesterday, we are once again going to be focusing on what we can now finally call Hurricane Lee as it continues its west-northwest trajectory towards the Aleutian Islands and eventually getting ever so close to the US and British Virgin Islands. We also have another area of interest just behind that, with that area of convection, as you can see with my mouse, just off the coast of Africa, with the National Hurricane Center expecting that to rapidly develop. And of course, we will also talk about our fishy storm, Hurricane Jova. We'll do a little bit of a physics lesson towards the end of the video because there's something really cool about Hurricane Jova and very unique that we need to talk about. So we're going to cover all of that in today's video. And if you do enjoy the video today, be sure to like and subscribe, share with family and friends who will be impacted potentially by Hurricane Lee as it continues to strengthen throughout the next couple of days. And also, I will let you guys know too that I will be keeping you guys updated on the YouTube channel. So I'll be providing continued posts throughout the day. I'm not talking about videos, but for example, we are expecting a reconnaissance mission later on today. So I know this video is taken as of this morning. I will be updating you guys on the channel. So you want to make sure to subscribe, not just for the videos, but also for some of those posts that I'll make in the community page, updating you guys on the latest conditions going into tomorrow. With that all said, let's get into today's video. We will begin today's video just like how we did yesterday with our current upper level water vapor imagery. And as you can see, here is Hurricane Lee continuing to move off to the west-northwest. If you guys saw yesterday's video, and if you haven't, go ahead and take a look. We talked about the dry air as well as the northerly wind shear. It wasn't as strong with our wind shear values, but what we really did have is some dry air intruding those outer bands of convection around the center. And as you can notice right now, a lot of that dry air has sort of retreated to the west and also condensed a bit as we get closer to the Aleutian Islands and the US and British Virgin Islands. Also to note, and we're going to be sure to touch on this at some point during the video, Hurricane Lee, as of the last observation, has slowed down considerably, and that is a very bad sign because when hurricanes slow down, that can allow for it to really soak in that very unstable environment and rapidly intensify. We are going to talk about models throughout the video. We are going to also have time steps for you. So if you want to skip around, go right to the models, or you want to go to a certain point of the video, you can go ahead and do so at your leisure. But we will show the models, and a lot of them are showing a pretty strong consensus that we are going to see some rapid intensification over the next 48 to 72 hours, if not earlier than that. So we already do have a Category 1 hurricane and Hurricane Lee, and you can even see on the water vapor, look at that banding right there, really ramping up around the eye of the storm. Also, as an honorable mention, we do have our area of interest just behind it, and that is expected to become a tropical depression over the next, say, 24 to 48 hours. Very high confidence from the National Hurricane Center that this is eventually going to formulate. Once again, a very favorable environment here off the coast of Africa for some additional rounds of convection to condense and produce some tropical development. Let's also take a look at the sea surface temperatures, and if we know anything about bodies of water, temperature really doesn't vary much out in the Atlantic and the Gulf during this time of the year. It would have to be well into the winter time till we see some huge temperature swings with our sea surface temperatures, or consistent activity within the Atlantic and the Gulf, which we really haven't seen much of that. Therefore, our sea surface temperatures still remain in the high 20s and low 30 degrees Celsius mark. If we were to denote our system, it's still right to the east of the Aleutian Islands, but look at where it's going. It is going to be heading right into this area. And let me go ahead and actually redraw that. It's really going to be taking more of a north-northwest turn once it passes to the north of the Dominican Republic. So it's going to be tapping into this environment, and it's just getting into warmer and warmer sea surface temperatures. I also want to note too, what's not shown on this map, but what we will sort of touch on as well, is that the wind shear that we talked about yesterday, that northerly low-level wind shear, has really started to taper off to very little, if any. So this storm is not encountering as much wind shear as it did yesterday, and it's also going into warmer sea surface temperatures downstream. Let's also now look at the 500 millibar jet, and just like yesterday, here is our upper level ridge and here's our long wave trough well to the north as we increase our latitude. And here is Hurricane Lee. And as you notice, very good streamlined flow off the coast of Africa. Not much of a northerly component, at least what's shown here on the 500 millibar chart. And we can expect that the system is going to continue to be steered in the direction of this streamlined flow. You also here have this area of low pressure that is off the Atlantic coastline, sort of with that counterclockwise flow, and that's expected to continue to move off to the northeast. So the trajectory of the system still remains, and again, we're going to talk about all this, but it is going to follow that streamlined flow off the coast of Africa, this easterly flow, and it's expected to still continue to move off to the north of the Leeward Islands. One thing to note is, take a look back at the United States. Here's your upper level ridge. I mean, I know this is not part of the video, but our friends in Texas, it's been hotter than hell where you guys live. And this ridge actually has ramifications for the pathing of this system going forward. A lot of folks are wondering, are we going to see a U.S. impact? Well, let's actually take a break for a second and let's head on over to the drawing board. Let's head on over to the drawing board now and take a look at this very useful product. This is the 500 millibar height GPM, so this is in geopotential meters. And if you guys think about tropical weather, we're always referring to the spaghetti plots and the spread, pretty much just like what I do. But we also use spaghetti plots to talk about the jet pattern. This is really important because take a look at what happens here in the lower 48, because this will have implications on the pathing of Hurricane Lee as we get into the weekend. As you go forward in time, take a look. We have very high confidence that we have this upper level ridge that situates itself once again across the southwest and portions of south central United States. And when we have a ridge of high pressure that is predominant as it's been, what can happen is these act as displacers for our cold air to the north, which is what we call shortwave troughs. And what you're going to see is over these next few frames, this ridge is going to eventually expand beyond the United States and even into parts of British Columbia and Alberta. The same places, by the way, that have been experiencing some terrible wildfires over the last several weeks. But watch what happens as we go beyond 72 hours. You see this ridge collapse down towards the southwest United States. Here's Hurricane Lee as it eventually is likely to become a major towards the weekend. And when you have this ridge collapse, it's because it's essentially displacing cold air to the north. You see your shortwave trough feature begin to dig down across the upper Great Lakes. Now watch what happens though as we get closer to early next week. You see that these little spaghetti noodles is our different model interpretations, or our different members of the ensemble. And you have this trough digging as far south as Kentucky or as far north as central Michigan. And of course, this certainly does have implications for where this hurricane goes. The general consensus, though, is no matter how far this trough digs south or north, it is expected that initially this system is to move off to the north. But what happens beyond 162 hours is certainly in question. So I wanted to show this to you guys and deviate a bit just to tell you sort of what happens in the lower 48 really does have implications for what happens with hurricanes or tropical systems. But you notice though that as we get beyond say 150 hours out, which would take us in early next week, is when we get all this chaos to happen. It almost looks as if a 5-year-old drew all over a map with their crayon, right? So there certainly is something to watch with this system, but again, if you're wondering why this system is expected to move off and veer to the north and sort of away likely from the Carolinas, is because of this shortwave trough that is really going to act as a deterrent from it continuing its west-northwest trajectory and instead move off to the north. All right, folks, let's head on back to the tropics, and this is taking a look at our 850 millibar map. This is looking at the low levels of the atmosphere, and clearly you can start to see the center of circulation with Hurricane Lee, even a little bit of an eye showing up here on the 850. Remember, 850 is about a kilometer off the ground. We're not exactly at the surface. We're, about a kilometer or so off the ground. So we also do have this easterly flow showing up riding over top of the hurricane. Remember, our hurricanes are pulling in moisture and it's moving counterclockwise, right? So we're seeing that counterclockwise rotation in the northern hemisphere. And notice that we don't have much northerly wind, right? We talked about this yesterday. I alluded to it a little bit earlier in the video, but we don't have northerly wind, meaning that our shear component is really no more, at least at the moment. So this is expected to really take advantage of the conditions out ahead of it. We've already mentioned the sea surface temperatures. We just talked about what's going to happen with the pathing of the storm going forward, as well as the weakening wind shear. So at least in the immediate term, we are seeing a very, very favorable environment, guys. I can't stress that enough. Here's taking a look at the infrared satellite of Hurricane Lee, and hey, what do you know? You're starting to see an eye beginning to form. Look at also our deep convection circulating around the center. If you've recalled the last couple of videos, we started out with some clustered convection 2 days ago, then it started to consolidate around the low, and now finally we're starting to see the eye. So with this deep convection around the eye of the hurricane, this is a very good sign that we are expecting to see this thing really start to ramp up in its intensification. And I gotta say, with the weather models, as we start to sort of allude to them, they are going to start to pick this up. Now, it's not to say that it couldn't be even more intense, right? Some of the solutions, if you remember from the last couple of days, have shown in upwards of a Category 5 hurricane. And it's really not out of the question, right? Because if you're undergoing this deep, rapid intensification and you're dropping pressure at 5 millibars per time step, the models may have a difficult time keeping up with that. And sometimes they do, as like what we saw with the Dahlia. So saying Hurricane 5, although it's the extreme case scenario in the next, say, 48 to 72 hours or the next couple of days, isn't out of the question. It is still the worst case scenario, but we can't rule it out because when these storms go through this type of cycle of strengthening their eye wall and intensifying the environment that they're in, that worst case scenario is still possible. So, very good organization right now. And to be honest with you guys, as we get into tomorrow morning, it's once again going to be interesting to see what happens. As I mentioned at the very beginning of this video, we are expecting a reconnaissance mission. We'll be sure to post that at some point today on their findings. But this is a very good sign if you're looking for a strong to major hurricane over the next couple of days. Here is the HAFS. This is a brand new model from NOAA. They actually just updated their computer system. I think it puts out at like 6 petaflops. I don't even know if I'm saying the number right, but I mean, the horsepower and the computational power of this model is going to be really fascinating to watch. We saw it run with Hillary and Adalia, and now we get to see it in action with Hurricane Lee. And look where it wants it to intensify. You notice that it's increasing its latitude as it continues to move off to the west-northwest, right? But look at what happens with our pressure. Rapid intensification. That's what we're talking about, right? Dropping all the way down to possibly 914. So that would be a major, major hurricane and arguably one of the strongest hurricanes we've seen in the Atlantic in the last several years. So that's why a lot of people have been gravitating to this system is not just because of where it's going to go beyond, say, the early next week, but just the sheer fascination on how intensifying this storm is going to be, how intense this storm is essentially going to be. So, as a meteorology junkie like I am, this is really what fascinates me. And by the way, even though it's not impacting the lower 48 at the moment, we got to keep in mind we have the U.S. Virgin Islands and the British Islands to be concerned about, as well as our folks in the Aleutian Islands. So even though it's not expected to make a direct impact, we could be seeing some pretty high tide and some really strong rip currents, because when these storms go through this strengthening period, it's going to cause these waves to be displaced. That water's got to go somewhere. So if you have folks that are down there in the U.S. Virgin Islands, or you know anybody down in that area, stay away from the beaches as we get into the weekend, because it's going to be terrible conditions for swimming, and it can be very life-threatening. So if there's anything, at least in the immediate term, anybody under threat, it's you guys down in the U.S. in British Islands and the Aleutian Islands, folks that are down there vacationing right now. You want to make sure that you're taking your proper precautions and keep a close eye on this thing, because it's still going to be a little bit too close for comfort as it moves through. But anyway, here's the HAFS-A. Very aggressive model with this thing, but even with looking at the Euro interpretation, also taking it down to a 916. So a lot of these models, the long-range models, even some of the ensemble members are taking this and really showing its rapid intensification cycle and reflecting it in these model runs. So would not be surprised to see this type of activity. And the National Hurricane Center is also hinting at that as well, expecting it to be a major hurricane by tomorrow morning, right? So this system has slowed down to about 12 to 13 miles per hour at the latest outlook as of this morning. And it's when these hurricanes slow down, that's not good, guys. That means that we're going to be seeing some very strong upscale growth within this system. And again, I know the keyword has been intensification. I probably said it a good 30 times during this video, but it is going to be undergoing intensification because it's starting to slow down and go into a favorable environment. So the National Hurricane Center has it being a major hurricane beginning tomorrow morning at the time that we make tomorrow morning's video and extending well throughout the weekend into early next week. On this latest outlook, it's actually interesting because if you remember from yesterday's cone of uncertainty, it had it being a hurricane, really into like Monday being past Puerto Rico. But this cone of uncertainty is actually slowing it down a bit. And remember, timing is going to be key. If we're talking about a shortwave trough digging through the Atlantic and into the Northeast, if this system's starting to slow down, then that's going to change things as far as its pathing is concerned. So that's something we have to keep a very close eye on over the next couple of days. If I had to make a critical period demarcation, it's going to be in the next 96 hours. So beyond wherever it's at in 96 hours is going to mean big implications on where this thing moves going forward into early next week. And speaking of which, here's our spaghetti plot, right? A ton of uncertainty, right? This spread beyond, say, the next 96 hours really starts to just have a bunch of questions. I mean, if you were to take the worst case scenario members, which are all the way skewed to the left of this spread, it takes it all the way into New Jersey and Long Island. And even these other members take it as far north as the Northeast. So I will tell you right now, I mean, it's either going to be essentially a fish storm or it's going to be a cause for concern up towards the Northeast and New England. So I know it's 240 hours out, guys, but I really want to note this. The reason why we continue to talk about this system is because of the fact that there is a lot of uncertainty beyond 96 hours. It still can have impacts in the Northeast and New England. We have to keep an eye on it as it strengthens because, I mean, it would be, I guess, negligible of me to not keep a close eye on things and see how things are going. I don't want to be letting you guys know that there's a hurricane heading towards New York literally at your doorstep. I would much rather talk to you guys about it, keep you informed, and at least just keep an eye on it as we go into this weekend. And let's revisit this and continue to revisit this as we go into next week. And finally, let's take a look here at our spread. Just wanted to make sure I had that on there. We have, of course, the same situation as we did yesterday. This is really expected to be anywhere between a Cat 2 and a Cat 4. But once again, as we talked about, very large spread between our members, between both the Cat 1 and a Cat 4. I would say that on the conservative end, if it doesn't go through rapid intensification, then you would be looking at some of these members being in the Cat 2 range as the likely solution. But because we're expecting this to really intensify over these next 24 to 48 hours, the more likely case scenario is anywhere between a Cat 3 and a Cat 5 by the time we get to probably Saturday, if not Sunday. So I want to end on a bright note, or sort of a good note here, and talk to you about what's happening out in the Pacific. I know it's not impacting anybody, but there's something really interesting that I wanted to show you with Hurricane Jova. Let's take a look. So I thought I would end today's video by taking a look at Hurricane Jova, and I already know what people are going to say. Brendan, why the hell are you covering Hurricane Jova? It's not even hitting anybody. It's out in the Eastern Pacific, right? The reason why is because I really love this stuff, as you guys can tell. I get really hyped about tropical weather, or really any weather, as somebody who majored in meteorology. And one of the things I wanted to point out to you guys that I think is really fascinating with this system, we're currently seeing Hurricane Jova as a Category 4 and getting ever so close to being a Category 5 right now. And you're probably thinking, well, Brendan, if it's going to be a Category 5, why is the eye so small? Well, it goes back to a physics term called the conservation of angular momentum. I'm not going to demonstrate that, but I'm sure if you go all the way back to your 8th grade physics class, they do talk about that with you. And it's sort of the figure skater effect. If I take my arms right now and I spin around this chair and I hold myself close, right, I'm going to spin faster versus if I held my hands out with weights in each palm, right? And that's the idea of conservation of angular momentum. If I tighten my area or center of circulation, it's actually dignifying faster velocities. So what you might be thinking is initially is that, well, it doesn't have a big eye, so it's not really going to be as strong. No, not at all. As a matter of fact, this smaller eye, very condensed, is actually showing very fast rotation around it, really strong velocities around the center of the eye. So share that with your friends today. If you're watching this and you skip towards the end of this video, I'm glad you did. Tell them about Hurricane Jova and maybe educate a few people, because that is something that is a really fascinating phenomenon in tropical weather. You know, these small eyes with these more intense hurricanes, it's because you're seeing the conservation of angular momentum at play. Anyway, guys, I hope you had a great rest of your day, I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's video. If you haven't yet already, be sure to subscribe, like, share this with family and friends who will likely be impacted by some of this tropical weather. And with that, we will see you on the next video.